Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, the Poketown store is the place to go. You can even get a 5% discount on your order if you do use the OmniPoke code. For today's video, we are going to be doing another top tier tweaks. Cologne and AC are both this weekend, and I'm obviously in attendance of the German event. So I've been practicing a lot with some of the top tier decks in the format right now. And I'm going to give you my take on where these kind of archetypes are at. I think for now, there are kind of 6 or 7 big decks right now. I think I'm going through 6 of them. Going to show you the top 3 in my eyes, which are clearly out in front based on like cup results and whatnot, as well as regional results and worlds. That's going to be Mewtwo, Pikachu, and Ability Zard. I'm also going to be showing off Malamar, Pidgeotto Control, Blounds, and I'm not showing off Gardevoir, but I do Gardevoir Sylveon. But I do think that archetype is also like rounding out tier 2, I guess I would say, with Mewtwo, Pikachu, and Zard being way out in front, and then the others kind of being tier 2 archetypes that are definitely going to have a showing at these 2 tournaments. So let's start off with Mewtwo, I guess. No, you know what? Let's start with Charizard. It's down here on his own. We'll get him going. So obviously Robin got a very good placement at Sheffield with a Blacephalon Fire Crystal build. And sort of brought that to the forefront. One of the main reasons why he decided to play the Crystal Blound build was he was expecting more Wobbuffet to be played, especially in the rise of potentially Mewtwo decks going into Sheffield. I have experimented with the Crystal Clown build, had quite a few games on stream with it, and I also went to a double cup last weekend with that archetype. I personally didn't really gel with the deck too well. I did think we were left wanting a lot of the time. The Fire Crystals obviously are horrible to see in the early turns. You have less push potential without any Acrobikes in the deck, so I think I just drew a little bit worse with that kind of build. So I've kind of reverted back to Old Faithful, these sort of Worlds List minus scoop ups basically. And that's kind of where I'm at the moment. Really, the only things I took away from Robin's list that I liked was the 4th Com and the 3rd Vulpix really do help out in mirror match situations. So when people are trying to target your Ninetales, you can then, develop more. And you also just have, an extra Com and a 3rd Vulpix, which both help you get it down early. So you can start targeting the board ASAP, which is a pretty big deal. For tech Pokemon, I still really like the Hooper. I think he's strong against Malamar, which is still a relevant force, especially when you're gusting around spell tags and using Hooper. You can force a 2-shot, which is obviously a very good deal. Hooper's also very good in mirror match situations sometimes. If they are putting down, Heatran, Dedenne, Jirachi, stuff like that turn 1, you can definitely punish them and take out a Jirachi for a single energy, which can sometimes be really valuable because it means you can be weldering to bench threats and keeping energies around for Heatran and Turtonator and stuff. Hooper's also very good for that exact same reason against Mewtwo because he can put a shift in, sometimes very easily. He can hit like 70. You're getting more energy attachments around the board and setting up Heatran and Turtonator. So I definitely think he has great synergy here just for being a 1 energy kind of swing card, which is really nice. I do still have the Volcanion in here. He's another non-GX attacker for the plethora of non-GX matchups that there are out there now. Even things like the Fire Crystal build of Ability Zard. This Volcanion still comes in clutch because, you can gust up their Ninetales and knock it out for 2 energies. With the Volk, you can also knock out Turtonators in response as well, so that's oftentimes a good attacker. And of course, you can still Grinch Jirachis for 2 energy against the likes of Malamar and Mirror and Pikachu and all sorts of things. So I still really like the Volk. I do find him useful. I was also testing on stream yesterday against a buddy of mine, and he came in like really, really clutch against Mewtwo and Pikachu. Just because if you go second and get that Flare Starter off, you've set up the Heatran and Turtonator basically for game from then on off of 1 Flare Starter, and that's, huge tempo against Pikachu and Mewtwo, which are very relevant archetypes right now, and they can't help but put down multiple tag teams. That's their whole approach. So the Volk is very good against those. I think a lot of people have been going down to 1 Reshizard. There are some builds of Ability Zard which play no Charizard. It's just Welder and Friends or whatever else it's called. I still think Reshizard definitely has a place. You are much more stamp-proof when you use a Reshizard to attack with because you have much more hit points. You only need to welder once to the guy and you can be threatening Flare Strike at the very least. Whereas when you're using all these non-GXs, they kind of do their thing and then get knocked out. Then you need another welder for the next guy. etc., etc. So you're always left wanting more when you're just using the non-GXs. So Charizard is still a very good card in my eyes, and definitely worth using, even if it is just to have the option of doing the double blaze for 3 energy to finish Dedennes. Like, that's good enough to be warranted in the list. And again, against things like Mewtwo, against things like Pikarom, you're against another 3-prize deck, so there's no reason why you can't put down this 3-prize Pokemon, make them have that extra hurdle to get through. So I think the card's definitely worth keeping in the list of the fire decks. I've tried so much Abilities Art at this point. Basically, since Worlds, it's been the deck that I've been following most closely, and this is the list that I'm kind of most content with. The only contentious card right now is the 4th Pokecom and the 3rd Vulpix. Those are the cards that I'm looking to switch out because I just want an extra Acrobike, basically, for more push potential. But this is the 60 that I'm at right now, and I'm pretty satisfied with it. I think the only other debate is going to 17 energy and 1 fire crystal. That's another thing that I've done previously, and I found it kind of okay. So that's the other thing that I'm sort of tussling with right now. I think with this list, there is a small concern that people are going to shut down Victini with Wobbs, especially the Mewtwo players. But I think it's kind of balanced, and I think the matchup oftentimes is decided before that moment in the game. So I think it's not a huge deal in my book. I do expect the the Fire Crystal Blound build to be popular of Zard though, so making sure you have a decent number of non-GXs is definitely going to be important to fight those mirrors these days. Let's look at Mewtwo now. Mewtwo's had a few different adaptations recently. I think Alolan Muck and Muck tag team has been the most recent GX to join the party. Severe Poison helping you get around the Psychic Fairy Charm, which is pretty nice, or the Ability Fairy Charm, and then you can just actually physically attack with this guy, which is pretty reasonable. He obviously gets around Power Plant as well, so you're a lot less vulnerable to those sorts of things. So physically getting the Muck down against them is pretty strong. Against the Guardian players, you can mix and match Severe Poison and Poison Absorption if they're going to try and like swing back into you or whatever. So that can be a nice combo that you go for. Even if you are doing 0 damage with Poison Absorption, they're already poisoned and you're healing 100 back off. So this card is pretty reasonable for that matchup. He also just is a flexible card. Healing in general against other non-GXs, like if you're against a Malamar and they're trying to set up 2 shots with Giratina because you've got Jirachi in play and stuff, Poison Absorption sometimes is enough to take a knockout if they've damaged themselves with Giratina, which they often will because they're very scared of Espeon Deoxys. So then you can just heal yourself back up, which is also pretty nice. So there are definitely spots where this card is reasonable. I've even been able to jump Beast Ring thanks to Severe Poison in weird spots. So this card's actually flexible and actually pretty strong in the list. I have had to Nasty Goo mix once or twice as well, but it's never gone too great. The only other like kind of additions that we've seen, I have taken out the Wob effect from this list, and that's more of a reaction to the amount of Zard now playing Blacephalon Crystal. I think the Wob effect is only reasonable against Pikarom, only if you can like afford to use Ball Search on it turn 1 when they haven't used their Coco turn 1, or if they haven't gone first or whatever, because Pikarom's priority is always the Coco anyway. And it's only good against half of the ability Zards out there these days, and maybe not even half, because there might be Charizard Lus builds where the Wob's not all that integral. So instead I've put in a Mind Report Mewtwo just to have extra use out of Welder. I do really like that option. It's treasure searchable, putting Welder back to the top of the deck, so you can just guarantee that you've got a pretty strong turn incoming, which is always very nice. The only other Pokemon that I'm not playing that has started to creep into lists is the Giratina. Distortion Dortina coming into this list, so you have an answer to Keldeo. I still don't think Quagnag's an important enough deck to respect enough for the deck space, but you definitely could do that if you want to. I'm playing 12 energy, which is a little higher than most, so if you want to go back down to the traditional 8-3, that's your space for Giratina in my eyes. Everything else is pretty straightforward. We've got the Nag, the Cargo, the Charizard, Solgaleo, Spedio, Latios. These are all the normal things. Like I said, Muck, the only real new addition. We've got Marshadow, of course. Resetting Hole is too good to say no to. The only other change I've made from Henry's list is that so obviously like Muck in for Cobalion or whatever else you want to say for the other GXs that he played. I've also cut the Radar. I never really liked the Radar. I think when it's only working off of one target, even though Dedenne is a very good out for you, I don't think it's worth it. I've changed it for a Friend Ball. It's usually able to find you a Dedenne anyways. and it can also be so much more because we play a lot of different types around here. Fire, Lightning, and Psychic are the best decks in the format right now, so Friend Ball is basically always live for us, which is pretty insane. So I like that as a one-of. It's a little bit of a cute card, but again, it's one of those, if you're not a big fan of it, you can cut it. But yeah, that's where I'm at with Mew 3. I've tested this a lot as well. I'm starting to be won over by the archetype, and I mean, I always respected the archetype as strong, but I've always been hesitant about the ugliness of hands sometimes, just because of the amount of GXs that you play that are basically just meant to be pitched. So you just have some opening hands sometimes which look pretty rough, but Mewtwo is definitely a solid contender, and it's just so flexible that even when it's behind, it can put the opponent in such weird spots, and you can climb back ahead in the race just by like turbo striking for a slow turn, and then suddenly you're able to Espeon Deoxys or do all these other crazy plays out of nowhere. So I think Mewtwo definitely is a really solid deck, and shouldn't be too afraid of Guardian winning from Sheffield. Guardian is still like one of these decks that has to dodge and weave to do well. It has to dodge Ability Zard for the most part. A lot of other matchups Guardian can have a favourable time against. I think the Muck is just one thing that makes it a little bit easier, but by no means is like an easy matchup for Mew 3 now. You just get a little bit less wrecked by Power Plant, which is, I guess, something, but yeah, the Muck is not like an easy fix. You still have a lot of things to try and get through in that matchup, but it definitely does gain you some percentage points. The other tier 1 deck in my eyes is Pikarom. I've basically had the same Pikarom list, but with like 3 floating spots for like the last like month or so. I'm floating between 1 and 2 Raichu. I'm floating between 2 and 3 Dedennes. I'm floating between Hooper and Zapdos, and then I'm kind of floating between playing 4 Volkner, 4 Cynthia, and 2 Stamps, and also then playing 4 Volkner, 3 Cynthia, 1 Stamp, 2 Judge. Those are like the kind of slots I'm working around right now. My latest greedy cut has been going down to 3 Electro Power, and I think this has actually been a long time coming. I almost did this at Worlds, or in pre-Worlds, because I found myself only ever using Electro Power with Lightning Ride GX and basically throwing the others away for the most part. Yes, there are situations when it can help you, you know, like push through a Heatran and stuff with like 2 uses of an Electro Power, with like full blitz plays, but in many situations you like never need 4 in my eyes. Like you really have to high roll 3 in a row for it to be useful against tag team decks, and I think that's just not all that common. So that's been my most recent cut, but it's meant that I can fit everything else that I want to in the list, really. It's allowed me to put the 3rd Dedenne back in the list. So let me know what you guys think about 3 Electro Power. Is it a cut that you've ever considered, or is it just one of those things that you naturally think is worthwhile? How many games have you won thanks to having all 4 Electro Powers in the deck? That's something that I really consider not that many, and I think with the Volkners and the Stellar Wishes, you have access to 3 copies very, very easily already. It's not a big deal in my eyes. So yeah, that's my most recent Pikarom. Again, if you're happy at 2 Dedenne, if you're happy at 1 Choo-Choo, if you want to squeeze in 4th Jirachi or Zapdos or an extra E-Power, that could definitely be done. And if you want to try out even things like Judge in addition to Stamp, that's also something that I've considered. Definitely do go for that. But I think Pikarom's becoming more and more established. It's pretty interesting that it's still like up in the air for sort of what's the best build. I think as Green's builds sort of go down in play, the Judge build gets a lot worse, and I think playing more traditional power draw supporters in Cynthia make more sense, and then the Stamps come in to help you out as well. So I think Pikarom will always have this disruption available to it. It's just the sort of speed of that disruption is the thing that's up for debate. From there, let's talk about the tier 2 decks. I'll start with Clowns, just because Clowns basically hasn't changed at all. My Clowns is basically the same list. I think from my last top tier tweaks, the only thing I did was add in the 4th custom catcher again, because it was a greedy cut to only play 3, I guess. But yeah, that's basically all I've done with the list. Blounds is still just Blounds. I think it's a strong archetype. I think there's not much Tapu Fini around at all. There's not much reason for Tapu Fini right now, because Blounds is like, you know, one of the top 7 decks rather than one of the top 3 or 4, you know. So the Fini's not often worth a deck space. So Blounds can just kind of do its own thing right now. I don't expect it to be teched against. But I think the natural increase of non-GXs in the other Welder decks is a bit of a worry. especially with the Blacephalon Crystal. It is very easy for them to have enough non-GXs to get through you. They can go for like a Turtle Smack, a Victini Smack, Blacephalon Crystal Smack. You know, they have a lot of one-hit KO potential naturally, and I think that's the only real bad matchup for Blacephalon. Malamar also sort of creeping back into popularity is a bit of a worry for the deck, but I think against Pikarom and Mewtwo, it's still able to fight the good fight and try and hit B-strings and win. So yeah, I think the archetype's by no means like terrible and is still up in there for consideration. We've got Malamar. My Mali, again, hasn't changed too much. The one change I've made from Mali, so obviously I'm playing the custom build rather than Acrobikes, and the main reason I do that is for specifically the Ninetales matchups, right? All the ability Zards, they can freely just 9 Temptations around you and never allow a spell tag to pop, or only use like a couple spell tags, and then you don't have enough damage on board to win the game. So custom catchers are basically vital for you to actually beat the ability Zard matchup, because you kill their tails and then suddenly your spell tags are popping, you're able to deal with Jirachis and get excess prizes all over the board, which is amazing. So customs are basically necessary right now, I believe, in Malamar to be able to beat ability Zard. I've also added Esper as well. This is how hard teched I am to try and deal with Ninetales. I want, as soon as one spell tag is popped, I want that Ninetales dead. I want it gone. I want it nowhere near me. I also want to be able to like Distortion Door a couple times to be able to snipe Vulpixes ASAP. So like the Esper in here, in addition to customs, gives you a lot of bench access. Normally it's like one or the other kind of thing. Esper goes in the Acrobike build, custom catchers come in and you cut Esper as like one of your slots. But I'm trying out both, and I really do think it's important to Grinch Ninetales in those matchups, because otherwise you're not going to do well. And customs in all other matchups are still like obviously very good cards. From there, everything else is pretty straightforward with the Psychic Malamar build. I'm playing 3 Viridians right now, not playing any Power Plants. I think the custom catchers do enough of a job for you to deal with Jirachi GXs. I think with the Esper as well, of course, you can be devoting spell tag damage or whatever else to gust up that Jirachi and finish it off. Or just use the Esper to knock it out as well, just like you would a Dedenne. So I think that matchup is fine without Power Plant. If you want to hard win the Mewtwo, you can go for the Power Plant. I mean, you still lose if they Espeon Deoxys spread your guys before you can get rolling. And like if you miss attachments or whatever. And the Power Plant's still like reasonable against random decks that you can just sort of jam into play and say, haha, you can't draw cards or whatever. But I think Malamar still has the age-old problem of inconsistency, so I'm just going to go for 3 Viridians. That's my own personal preference. Ericas are in here, obviously, because we play customs, so trying to make those hands work better. And the Recycle Energy has crept into the Malamar decks, and I have to say I am a fan. I think it's strong. It's just, you know, a load off your mind that you'll otherwise like sometimes run out of energies to attach in addition to all these recharges. So it's just one of these cards that you don't have any search for, but as soon as you find it, you attach it, and then you're happy that you've got it for the rest of the game, basically. So yeah, it's a nice one-off to have in the deck overall. But yeah, Malamar is actually pretty reasonable. It's one of these decks that I don't think I'll go near again for a while, just because of how I performed at Worlds with it. I think my biggest advice for Malamar is play it fast, no matter what you do. Like, it's better for you to play fast and make mistakes with Malamar than to play slowly and play perfectly. That sounds really bad and, like, wrong and backwards, but, like, as long as you're not making horrendous mistakes, as long as you're playing quickly with Malamar, you probably win more games than the person playing correctly and slowly, because they'll tie more. So, yeah, you got to play quick with Malamar no matter what you do. Just start slamming energies down, start treasuring and doing stuff, and think about it all later. To a certain degree, because you got to play games fast if you want to avoid tying. Finally, we have Pidgeotto Control as the final deck. This is still a deck that I think is a contender. Obviously, you're a little bit concerned about Espeon Deoxys. I think Malamar is like your hardest matchup. I think that's harder than Mewtwo. But I think you can still have the goods to beat anything. You can trap them with their hand. You can use Jesse James now to accelerate that earlier in the game. Now you can stamp them to 3 and be able to Surge Mars Jesse James. So you have a bit more of a healthy prize buffer, which is nice. I've not made too many changes to the lists, I don't think. I'm playing 3 Guru now instead of 4. To add in a second Pal Pad, just because whenever Pal Pad's been prized, I really hate it. It really slows down your win conditions. Whenever you have Pal Pad, it means you can go like Pal Pad, Chip Chip, and Crushing or whatever. But if you don't have the one of Pal Pad, you then have to go like, fine, I'll get Surge, Mars, Chip Chip, and it slows like your entire process down every single turn. So yeah, that's why I've gone for that. I still keep the Giraffes in here. I think it's strong against Mali and Mewtwo. And Mirror, so yeah, I think that's pretty cool. Everything else is pretty reasonable. I'm only playing 1 Cynthia in favor of 2 Tate and Liza, because again, this is a card that you don't like to prize very often. So essentially the one-offs are cards that like you can afford to prize, but everything else you can't really afford to prize. I know like you'd rather not prize a Mew or whatever, but sometimes it just happens. But yeah, everything else you really can't afford to prize too much. The only other card that's like really horrible to prize is Recycle Energy, but you can play around that just by, you know, making sure you're always holding Water Energies. It's just worse against like stamps and judges from the opponents. But yeah, I think the archetype's still solid. Less Judge Pikarom in theory does help this archetype out a decent amount, and yeah, I think it's still a solid play. If you don't expect a lot of Malamar, it can still be good, and genuinely it's one of these decks that I'm considering for the regional. It's very rare that I will dip my toe in the sort of disruption deck arena, but I might be giving it a go just because I'm a little bit frustrated with missing welders sometimes and not being able to play the game sometimes with all these other decks right now. Like sometimes you just can't play the game against like mirror matches for like all the top 3 if your opponent just draws better than you. And that's a bit of an ugly feeling, whereas this deck, at least like you have your own game plan and you're more or less playing against yourself, and the opponent oftentimes can't interact with you. And that feels like bad to say, but also it means that you're the one dictating what happens for the most part. As long as you can get early Elms and early Airmails, from there you're in control of the game basically the entire time. So yeah, I think Pigeons is still a deck that you could consider as one of the top ones. I think it's foolish to write this archetype off. The only sort of thing is time is the factor. Again, this is one that you have to play fast. You have to set up your discard pile so that you already know what you're resource managing, and you need to not be afraid to call a judge if your opponent is trying to play slowly and stuff like that. So it's definitely a headache of a deck. You can win matchups with other decks easier sometimes, and this is obviously a slow grind, and you put yourself into a situation where you're probably going to play Pokemon for 9 hours non-stop, because you won't have much time for breaks. And that's a bit of a problem because you're basically always going to time, be it a game up or not, unless your opponent decides to be salty and concede after like one game that was only 45 minutes instead. So yeah, I mean, it's a hard grind, but the deck's good overall. So yeah, those are the 6 decks that I had that I believe round out the top 2 tiers of the format right now. I think Guardian is a deck that I haven't touched much, and I personally just don't think it's a deck for me, so I'm not really going to comment on that archetype. But everything else I've given a decent go at this point, and I think all the builds I've got so far are pretty reasonable. And yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what's going to take down these 2 regionals coming up. Let me know what you think of the lists, and if there was any glaring errors there, do let me know. And yeah, I'll hear it all down below. If you're going to Cologne, say hey, and good luck to everyone at those tournaments. I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.